Imagine building something from nothing, pouring your soul into it, changing the world with it, and then being fired from it, kicked out of the very company you created, humiliated in front of the entire world, called a failure, a has-been. What would you do? Would you give up? Would you just walk away? Or would you come back and change everything? This is the story of a man who was fired from his own dream and returned to build the most valuable company in history. This is the story of Steve Jobs. In 1985, Steve Jobs was 30 years old, and he had just been fired from Apple, the company he co-founded in his parents' garage 9 years earlier. But let's go back further, before the billions, before the iPhone, before the legend. Steve Jobs was born in 1955 and given up for adoption. He grew up in Silicon Valley, a curious, restless kid who never quite fits into the system. He dropped out of Reed College after just one semester because he couldn't see the point, and his adoptive parents were spending their life savings on his tuition. But he didn't leave campus. He slept on friends' floors. He returned Coke bottles for 5-cent deposits just to buy food. He walked 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal at a Hare Krishna temple. And he kept learning. He started attending classes he actually cared about, like calligraphy. That course, he later said, taught him about beauty, design, and typography principles that would one day shape the Macintosh computer. In 1976, at just 21 years old, he and his friend Steve Wozniak started Apple Computer in a garage. They had no money, no investors, and no real business plan. Just an idea. Computers should be for everyone, not just for engineers. Within 4 years, Apple went public. Steve Jobs became a multi-millionaire overnight. He was on magazine covers, a tech rock star, the youngest self-made mogul in America. But that success made him arrogant, controlling, difficult to work with. By 1985, after a series of clashes with Apple as CEO John Scullin, Jobs himself had hired the board of directors sided against him. They voted him out. They stripped him of all responsibilities. He didn't just lose his job, he lost his identity. He would later say, "I didn't see it then, but getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." But in that moment, it felt like death. For months, Steve Jobs was lost. He thought about leaving Silicon Valley entirely, maybe traveling, maybe giving up on tech altogether. He was a public failure. The man who got kicked out of his own company. People whispered about him. The media mocked him. His ego was shattered. But slowly, something began to shift. He realized he still loved what he did. He didn't love Apple, the corporation. He loved creating. He loved building tools that could change the world. So he started over. He founded a new computer company called Next. It didn't become a massive success, but it pushed boundaries with beautiful hardware and powerful software, innovations that were way ahead of their time. Then he bought a small animation studio from George Lucas for $5 million. It was struggling, barely surviving. Most people thought it was a waste of money. That studio was called Pixar. At Pixar, Jobs learned patience. He learned to trust creative people. He watched as a team of animators poured their hearts into a project that seemed impossible, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. In 1995, Toy Story was released. It became a global phenomenon. Pixar went public, and overnight Steve Jobs was worth over $1 billion more than he'd ever made at Apple. But the money wasn't the point anymore. He had learned something deeper. Failure had made him humble, hungry, human again. Meanwhile, by 1996, Apple was dying. The company Steve built was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had lost their way, with too many products, no clear vision, and zero innovation. In a desperate move, Apple bought Next for $429 million and brought Steve Jobs back as an advisor. Within months, he was running the company again, but this time, he was different. He wasn't the arrogant kid who thought he knew everything. He was a builder who had been broken and then rebuilt. He looked at Apple's mess and made a brutal decision: kill almost everything. He cut 70% of Apple's products. He told the team, "We're going to focus on 4 things. That's it. 4 great products, not 40 mediocre ones." People thought he was crazy. But he had clarity now. He knew what mattered. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac, colorful, playful, and simple. It was a massive hit. Then came the iPod in 2001. 1,000 songs in your pocket. It changed how the world listened to music. Then the iPhone in 2007. A phone, an iPod, and an internet device, all in one. It wasn't just a product, it was a revolution. Then came the iPad, the App Store, the entire ecosystem that made Apple not just a company, but a way of life. By 2011, Apple became the most valuable company in the world. The man who was fired in humiliation had returned to build an empire worth hundreds of billions of dollars. But Steve Jobs never forgot where he came from. In his famous 2005 Stanford commencement speech, he told the students, "I didn't see it then. But it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life." He also spoke about death. He had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003, and he knew his time was limited. He said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart." On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. But his legacy lives on in every iPhone, every app, every entrepreneur who dares to think different. He didn't just build products, he built a vision of what the future could be. So if you've ever been fired, rejected, or told you're not good enough, remember Steve Jobs. He was kicked out of his own company. He lost everything. People called him a failure. But he didn't quit. He started over. He learned, he grew, and when he came back, he didn't just save Apple, he changed the world. Your failure isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of your greatest chapter. As Steve himself said, stay hungry, stay foolish, so keep going. Your comeback might be closer than you think. Thanks for watching. If this story inspired you, please like and subscribe for more.